Hello there. Welcome to the pilot episode of the English Ready podcast. I am Teacher Mark, and let us mark our way into discovering English lessons in a different yet very informative way. Prepare your listening ears and get excited, for we are about to begin. Marking it with Teacher Mark. In this episode, we will be learning more in identifying the propaganda techniques used in various promotional materials. In an era wherein everywhere you look you can see advertisements and promos for different products, it is really not that difficult to see different propaganda techniques. What is a propaganda? Propaganda refers to a type of message aimed at influencing opinion and the behavior of people. An obvious example of a propaganda is when political candidates advertise themselves on television, radio, or even on printed materials such as posters and billboards. Advertisers, influencers, and politicians have been using propaganda techniques for many years. But what then is the goal or objective of a propaganda? The goal of propaganda is to publicly promote something. Propaganda is considered as an information put out by an organization or government to promote a policy, idea, or a cause. Again, the goal of propaganda is to promote something publicly. And in a positive context, we can use propaganda in promoting good causes. For example, Malala Yousafzai, a young Pakistani woman, advocates for the right to proper education of girls in her country. Another example is young Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg, promoting challenges to government leaders to take action regarding climate change mitigation. In our own history, propaganda was used to open the eyes of Filipinos to the atrocities that the Spanish government in the 19th century were doing to the country. A group of educated young men who were living in Europe at the time decided to publish newsletters containing articles that point to the plight of Filipinos under Spanish rule. These men were Mariano Ponce, Graciano Lopez Jaena, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. The group was called the Propaganda Movement. The propaganda movement called for political reforms in the Philippines in the late 19th century and produced books, leaflets, and newspaper articles to educate others about their goals and issues they were trying to solve. The propaganda movement created the newsletter La Solidaridad, which aims to open the eyes of Filipinos in 19th century to ask for reforms in the government. Dr. Jose Rizal, who was a member, also wrote eye-opening novels such as Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Now that you know more of the intentions and goals of using propaganda techniques and how you can use it positively, let us then try and break down the different types of propaganda techniques in writing. We can classify it depending on which part we would like to gain more emphasis in our promotion. There are three main divisions of propaganda appeal. We have the logical appeal, ethical appeal, and the emotional appeal. In logical appeal, propaganda techniques under this try to appeal to the intellect of the audience. When we say appeal, we refer to a plea, request, or demand. In ethical appeal, it is used to establish the writer as fair, open minded, honest, and knowledgeable about the subject matter. While in emotional appeal, the writer establishes techniques that will hit the emotions of the audience. Look around you. Can you now see the propaganda used in printed campaign materials? Under logical appeal, techniques such as bandwagon and card stacking are used. In ethical appeal, techniques such as testimonial and transfer of authority is applied, while techniques such as glittering generalities, name calling, patriotic appeal, and using catchy slogans are some of the techniques applied under emotional appeal. For you to learn more on these propaganda techniques, I encourage you to go over your book or your learning sheet and find out the differences of these particular techniques. Our community changes rapidly because of the many influences we get from society. Partly, our choices are influenced by the attraction we get from the different promotions we see around us. Come to think of it, commercials and other advertisements influence our buying decisions and even our choices during elections. It is because of the influence of propaganda techniques used in the promotional materials. Now that you are more aware of it, it is now your duty to be more critical and aware of the products you choose. Remember, our present choices influence our future. Anyhow, look at the time. I am sure that you gained more learning in this podcast. If you still find some of the things in this lesson a little unclear, do some digging and practice your independent learning skill. Look into the different types of propaganda appeal and compare the different techniques from each other. I hope that this podcast lesson gave you added information on our lesson in propaganda techniques. After you go over the lesson and you go over your book and you still realize that you need more information on the topic, do not hesitate to communicate with your teacher in English. It is now time to end this podcast. Do not forget, our curiosity to discover new things to learn will help us understand who we are. Also, always remember that reading will take you to places. Take the time every day to read books. Learning will be easier when we start reading today. Thank you for listening to our podcast episode today. This is Teacher Mark cheering you on.